a huge impact in Korea. I read an article today in the internet that it was sold 10 million times in Korea, which I don't believe is true. I think that's an exaggeration. I think that maybe several millions of copies in the last years, but it had a huge impact, and it's very interesting because Korea was very Buddhist culture, and in the pre-modern times, Buddhism was the main intellectual discipline in the pre-modern time up to 15th century, at least, and then it changed to Confucian tradition, of course, and it had its own modes of understanding the Indian culture, understanding the life of Siddhartha, understanding the meaning of Buddhism and philosophy and literature and art. And this changes, of course, in the rapid changes in the modernization and globalization starting in the 20th century. So this might be an interesting point to understand the effect of Siddhartha. I'll just start my screen sharing. Where's my... So I'm going to talk about pre-modern Siddhartha narratives in Korea at first, so we can see where it starts actually to reproduce images and narratives about the historical person Siddhartha in Korean pre-modern times. And we'll talk about the first reception of Hesse Siddhartha in the 1920s, which is also the colonial period in Korea. You may know that Korea was under Japanese rule in this time. So it is time of modernization and also a time of colonization where the reception of Siddhartha begins and also has its first impact in the intellectual world. And at a certain point, I will do a very short analysis of the reception strategy based upon the transliteration of Sanskrit names in these translations. So let me begin with the pre-modern Siddhartha narratives in Korea. This is a statue from 6th century Korea. It's not literature at all. I'm going to show you some images to help understanding the context. So this is Siddhartha sitting in a ponderous pose, which is a very famous work in Korea from the 6th century. I think it's Goguryeo or Silla dynasty where it was produced. And this was a very popular kind of artwork at that time. So Siddhartha, in his position as prince, as not have achieved Buddhahood. So he's not Buddha as a saint or even a deity, but he is here as a historical person, as a prince who is pondering upon life and philosophy before he breaks his way to the samanas and to his intellectual journey. So Buddhism reaches Korea actually very early, as early as 3rd century, 4th century, via Chinese translation of Sanskrit sutras. There is this huge translation project in China of translating the Sanskrit sutras, and they reach Korea in classical Chinese. So the Korean scholars were reading and approaching Buddhism in the Chinese language, in Chinese script. And after a while, they have developed a whole bunch of autonomous reception of Siddhartha narrative, not only in artworks like this I show you here, but also in literary works. There are actual literature on the life of Shakyamuni Buddha and the life of Prince Siddhartha, of course, in the following centuries. Most important ones I show you here written by the monk Unmuk in 1328, Deeds of Shakyamuni Buddha. It's a very voluminous work in 2 volumes that depicts the historical person Buddha, not only the Buddha in a religious sense, but also the tales and the anecdotes interwoven with the historical place of India and the intellectual climate of India, which is very interesting at this time point for the Buddhist public. The work on the right side records on life of Shakyamuni Buddha, Sokpo Sangjol, which is written by a king. So the king himself was interested in this kind of literature. he writes this. By the way, the first piece of literature written in Korean script, Hangul. So the first piece of national literature written in the national script in this time is actually about Shakyamuni Buddhas, actually about the personal anecdotes and personal dimensions of Siddhartha in a way. So there is a heavy reception and reproduction of Siddhartha narrative in Korea already in the pre-modern sense. So the cultural understanding of Buddhism and especially of Siddhartha is very dominant and very deeply anchored in the Korean intellectual culture. And the question is now, what happens when Siddhartha, written by the German literate Hermann Hesse, comes to Korea at the time point where everything is changing, everything is being modernized and globalized, and Korea is colonized by the Japanese Empire. So this kind of dramatic situation where the traditional philosophical thinking and traditional literature is rapidly changing into a new environment, into a new global context. What happens here? Here I show you the first appearance of Siddhartha translation in 1926. It happens in the journal The Buddhism, Bulgyo, in the issue number 22. The translator is called Yang Gon-shik, but it's actually not the real translator. I will explain it later. This is a partial translation that it appears in 8 following issues of in this journal, The Buddhism. It only translates the 3 Unterkapitel of the first part, der Sohn des Brahmanen bei den Samanas and Gautama, and it actually ends with Gautama, and it does not show the next chapter, das Erwachen. This is very obviously because this is the point in the story where Siddhartha goes away from Gautama Buddha and actually finds enlightenment himself. So, which is very problematic in the Buddhist view of things. It's the enlightenment cannot be found outside of the Buddhist orthodox scenario. So this is maybe the point where too much critique or too much problem was seen in the narrative of Hesse's Siddhartha. So we have this partial translation in the first appearance, and this is indeed a indirect translation. You see, it's only 4 years after the original publication in Germany. So we can ask ourselves, how can the Korean literature scene react so fast or so quick on this European literature? And as I know about this time period, there is nobody that is who is capable of reading or even translating complex literature works from German into Korean. So it has to be an indirect translation, whether from the Chinese or from the Japanese translation. At that time, I did my homeworks and I found out the second original, so to say, which is a Japanese translation by Mitsuya, 1925. This is the first translation of Siddhartha in Japanese. The title is Siddhartha, so it's kind of a phonetic translation of the German title. I analyze a little bit the text, the comparison of the Japanese and the Korean translation. It is really one-to-one translation. So the Korean translator just took the Japanese translation and made his own translation only by substituting the grammatical parts. Korean and Japanese are very close related languages. So this is easily possible, and this was also the basic method of receiving Western literature at that time. You just take a Japanese translation and move it into a Korean translation and say you're a translator. This is the very obvious strategy at the time. And the information we see on the first page of this translation is the title, which is very strange. It's called Siddhartha, not Siddhartha. In Korean, it's very well possible to say Siddhartha, which is very accurate, but it's still called Siddhartha, which is a problem for me. I had to look it up why this happens. It's kind of a key element to look at the reception situation here. And the other informations here on the side of the translation comes from Germany. The author is Hermann Hesse, and the translator is Yang Gunshik. So I will do a quick analysis of the Sanskrit names, how they are translated, transliterated also in these two translations, because there we can see the difference between the Japanese translation and the Korean translation, and also about the reception situation and reception context of these two translations. So if you have the term or the name Siddhartha, the Japanese translation will go very phonetically and say Siddhartha, which is very accurately as accurate as it goes in Japanese language. In Korean is Siddhartha, like I said before, and Brahmane is in Japanese Brahmane. In Korean is surprisingly Paramun, which is similar but very wrong, let's say, in a phonetical sense. And Atman is in Japanese Atoman. And in Korean, it's Jin-a, which has nothing to do with the Sanskrit term in phonetic level. It is actually a philosophical translation from the Chinese tradition. So the path it takes from the Sanskrit German term to the source language to the target language is happening in the Japanese translation directly over the German version. So the way is Sanskrit, German, and Japanese. This changes rapidly in Korean translation, even if it's an indirect translation of the Japanese translation. It goes from Sanskrit, then to Chinese and to Korean. Why is this happening? This is very interesting because this happens in the whole book. All the person names, all the city names, all the philosophical termini, they're all translated this way. The translator always takes the Chinese version of the Sanskrit term. He knows that the Sanskrit term means the Chinese term in this way, and he substitutes them consequently throughout his translation. So whereas the Japanese translation is trying to understand Hermann Hesse Siddhartha as German literature, as contemporary German literature, and to introduce it as such in Japan, the Korean reception is trying to understand Hermann Hesse Siddhartha as Buddhist document. It is a Buddhist narrative written by a German writer, but it is all the way about the Buddhist narrative on the person of Siddhartha. It has been understood as a continuation or an alternate perspective on the matter of Buddhism and the life of Buddha Shakyamuni, which must have been very confusing because it is not about the historical Buddha. It is a literary reconstruction of these themes and these philosophical problems. So it also explains a little bit why the translation is only a partial translation in this first occasion, because maybe the editors of the journal Buddhism understood that it is just a literary vision, not a truthful depiction of historical Buddha. Maybe this is the reason why it stops there, and maybe it's the reason why Korean reception of Siddhartha is much more different in this first phase than the others in East Asia, because it tries to connect and to also mix up the traditional view with the Western view, with the Orientalistic view into one perception. So there is this tension between the exotic Orientalistic vision and the domestic traditional vision on Siddhartha as personality, in this occasion. And in Korea, clearly there is some kind of intercultural synthesis. Yes, it comes to a hybridization of these 2 points. So it is at the same time traditional, at the same time it is also modern, it is at the same time sinocentrical, it is at the same time but also Eurocentric. So it's a complex maneuver that is being carried out in this single occasion. I may come to a conclusion now. We just saw the first introduction of Siddhartha to Korea in 1926. We also saw the selective reception strategy of terminology, which indicates that Siddhartha was taken for a realist Buddhist document, not as German literature, and that the translator is trying to balance between Eurocentrism and sinocentrism, to balance between pre-modern and modern, between Western and Eastern thoughts. This is maybe an important point. And this kind of leads to a weakening of Orientalism, programmed originally into Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, also programmed into the Japanese program of translating such literature into their own language. So it kind of comes to a Relativierung, another word in English, of the Orientalistic effect fundamentally given in this work. So maybe we have here a case of intercultural hybridization of narratives and terminologies in a translation, in a translative event. And that may be peripheral, strange, but maybe it's a gain for the intercultural view on these processes and works. I think I haven't used too much time, and I'm looking forward maybe for some questions. You can also ask me in German. I will answer in German and English both. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Park, for that quite fascinating account of the journey of Siddhartha into Korea and of the historical Siddhartha by Chinese, and then the novel via Chinese and Japanese. I think it was also quite very, very intriguing that that Erwachen, the chapter Erwachen, is not there in the translation of the novel, and of course the attempt to look at Siddhartha as a Buddhist narrative of Shakyamuni Buddha by a German writer rather than as a novel of a contemporary German novelist. I think we have two presentations, Niruma Zushi and Park Sul, with very interesting takes on Siddhartha, and I would open the floor for questions, for comments, for observations, and I already see Mihir has his hand up.
Yeah, so for my question is directed at Nirupama. First of all, thank you for such a beautiful presentation. I'm a little overwhelmed, so I'll try to keep my comment and question as concise as possible. First of all, a comment. Your reiteration of how time has been depicted in Siddhartha has it reminded me of how time is normally depicted in modern science fiction films, where past, present, and future are like simultaneous, and yeah, they are all, time is like a flat circle. So that was the one comment which I had, one observation. The question was, you tried to explain Siddhartha's understanding of the world using the Vedanta way of thinking. Would that also be a part of the traditional Brahmanical Hinduism, as it's called, or is it outside the umbrella of Brahmanical Hinduism? And if it is, then can we actually, draw the lines that this, what Siddhartha learns or what he practices can be, brought under the umbrella of Hinduism and this under the Buddhism? Because when I read it, I thought it's like one continuous flow which he goes in. How would you respond to that?
Yes, thank you. First, about the time, the comment which you made, actually, that's very interesting to know. In science fiction, now the time is depicted in this particular format. So, really good point. Then the second question which you have asked, it is related to this Brahminical Hinduism and all that. So actually, I would like to just what Herr Kushel in his morning lecture, he said that is Siddhartha is more like a universal religiosa disto. So it's, I think we should not, actually rather we should not go by this Brahminical or Brahminical Hinduism and there is some other Hinduism and all that. See, the thing is, if we, as a student of philosophy, Indian philosophy, when you read Siddhartha, like as one book which comes in front of you as a novel by one German author, forget about German author, by any author for that matter, as a text, and as a student of Indian philosophy, how I can relate, like how when I read through this text, I see many references directly linked to the Vedanta or Upanishadic verses. So that can be actually one way of interpreting without knowing Hesse's biographical details or what he says, how he wants to distance himself from Indian religion or any such influences. Without all that, just as a piece of work or a literary text, when we read this Siddhartha, and actually I think that is the beauty and the greatness of this text, that everybody can interpret or understand this text as per his or her what would I say, a level of understanding or with his or her prior knowledge. So even like these specific terms, Brahminism, or even for that matter, in the morning we had one question about bhakti, whether it is later on only the bhakti is very prominent, but it is not like earlier in the so-called Brahminism, Vedanta or Hinduism, there was no space for bhakti. If you read Shankaracharya's Viveka Chudamani or even Gaudapada Karika, all these ancient texts actually, even there you find very clear reference to all bhakti and all these movements. Actually, Shankaracharya is known for this Advaita philosophy and where knowledge is supreme, so to say. But it does not mean that he excludes bhakti or karma yoga. In his Vivek Chudamani, which is actually the bhashya or commentary on Upanishads, when we read that Vivek Chudamani, you will see that many places Shankaracharya says that the same thing you can approach through bhakti as well as through karma yoga, but he stands for that jnana path. Like as I said in my this Fotra also, that is the there can be various paths, numerous paths to reach that ultimate goal. And I think that is what as a reader, as an Indian reader, I find the beauty or greatness of Siddhartha lies in that okay, fine, it's a maybe he has got many influences from Chinese and naturally from that Christianity and Chinese and Buddhism and Hinduism, that's fine. But what is the final outcome, what we have in front of us, that is, I think, more important, and that talks clearly about the self-realization or the pursuit of enlightenment of one person. And that is fascinating actually. You go by any path, you reach that destination.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, any other questions or observations? I have one very small observation after listening to Park Sool and to Nirupama Joshi. I was wondering, I mean, I go back to Mihir's question actually, in the sense that maybe Hesse not having been to India is a factor for him to be dealing with this at a level of abstraction. I wonder what would have happened had he come to India in the 1920s with with the Indian national movement in full swing, with Gandhi and Ambedkar together, and having seen had he experienced the entire discourse between the two of them, and so on and so forth. But I think it's quite a fascinating topic. And if there are no further questions or observations, are there any? Subbu, yes, please. You're on mute, Subbu.
If at all he had come to India, he would have met the experience that others went through. Gandhi was irrelevant during the freedom movement. It was Tagore who was so important. So I am very sure that Tagore would have held sway, not Gandhi.
Okay, if there are no further questions, then it is just my pleasant duty to thank the speakers very much, Park Sool as well as Nirupama Joshi, for very, very interesting presentations. And of course, to thank the team at UNI Mumbai for having had this symposium or continuing with this symposium. Thanks very much, and back to you, Mihir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Joshi. Thank you, Dr. Park Sool, for your unique perspectives. Thank you, Dr. Brahme, for the excellent moderation. We would now be having a short break, and